So today we're going deep on Carl Jung's Red Book. And this is not your typical diary, right?
Yeah.
It's more like getting inside the mind of someone who's wrestling with some pretty huge questions. Mythology, psychology, what is God even? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and what's so interesting is that this wasn't just, Jung randomly journaling. This was a deliberate choice for him. He was going through a major transition, leaving his position at the Berkholzli Psychiatric Hospital, and he actually describes it as intentionally confronting his own unconscious.
Intentionally confronting your unconscious. That sounds intense, to say the least.
Oh, it was. He even compared it to feeling like he was living in his own personal insane asylum.
He actually said that. My own personal insane asylum.
He did. And get this, he started analyzing these mythological figures, these myths, as though they were patients on his couch.
Hold on. So instead of just, like, enjoying the stories, he was trying to get inside the heads of Oedipus and all those guys.
Exactly. He even said that reading myths was sometimes like listening to a lunatic telling me his anamnesis.
Okay, that's that's both hilarious and a little creepy, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
So where does the Red Book actually come into all of this?
Well, while this is all happening, he starts having these incredibly vivid fantasies and dialogues. We're not just talking daydreams here. He's interacting with his soul, arguing with figures from mythology. It was like this inner world was just as real to him, if not more so, than the outside world.
Okay, so it's like having a song stuck in your head, but a million times more intense, and with Greek gods. So how did he capture all of this? Was he just carrying around scraps of paper and jotting down notes whenever inspiration struck?
He actually started keeping a really detailed record of these experiences in this brown notebook that he had. But it wasn't just passively writing down what he was seeing and hearing. He called it active imagination. Like he was consciously participating in these inner dialogues.
So he's creating this whole world in his mind and then analyzing it like it's separate from him, which I guess makes sense since he was a psychiatrist. Was anybody else doing this kind of thing back then, or was he on his own?
It's interesting you say that. He was actually part of a larger trend at the time. Several artists in his circle were exploring really similar ideas. Painting, writing, all coming from this place of deep inner exploration.
So like this deep dive into the unconscious was happening way before podcasts were even a thing. But getting back to the Red Book, I noticed all these recurring symbols and images. There's this one about a flood that really stood out.
You're talking about the one from 1913, right? Where he has this vision of a flood overtaking Europe.
That's the one. Was he just, like, obsessed with Wagner or something? What's the deal with that vision?
Well, he saw it as a premonition of World War I. It was a turning point for him. This was one of the first times that he recognized a strong link between his own inner world and the events that were happening out in the world on a global scale. He even started calling some of his dreams big dreams because they felt connected to something much bigger than himself.
So he's tapping into, like, the collective nightmares of humanity before anyone even knows what's coming. That's both fascinating and terrifying.
That's where his whole concept of the collective unconscious comes from. This idea that underneath our personal unconscious, the stuff that's unique to us, there is an even deeper layer that connects us all. A shared wellspring of images and patterns of behavior that he called archetypes.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see why this Red Book is such a big deal. But let's unpack some of the specific symbols that he uses. I keep seeing these images of black and white serpents. What's up with those? What do they represent? Those serpents, they feel symbolic, right? Like, is this a good versus evil thing we're talking about here, or is there more to it?
It goes even deeper than that. Think of them as representing the conflict of opposites that Jung was always so fascinated by, those opposing sources within us. The black serpent that often symbolizes the unconscious, that shadow side of ourselves we try to keep hidden, and then the white serpent that represents consciousness, the drive towards reason and light.
So it's not really good versus bad. It's more like the parts of ourselves that we're willing to accept versus the ones that we'd rather just, like, sweep under the rug and pretend aren't there.
Exactly. Jung really believed that to truly grow, we have to find a way to integrate both, to become whole. He called this individuation, this process of becoming a complete person.
He makes it sound kind of rough, though. Like, he describes this integration thing as painful, even terrifying in places. It's like a death and rebirth experience. There's that part where he talks about going through his own personal hell. Was he being literal there?
Well, he wasn't talking about actual fire and brimstone or anything, but on a psychological level, he was definitely describing what it felt like to confront the darkest parts of himself, to really look them in the eye.
Okay, yeah, I can see how that would be pretty intense. Speaking of intense, Jung also gets into some pretty heavy stuff about religion, how the world was changing around him at the time. There's this one passage where he's talking about God dying and being reborn, and then he mentions this fiery worm crawling on the earth. I mean, that image is like burned into my brain now, but I have no clue what he was trying to say with that.
Things get really interesting there. We know that Jung was really grappling with the decline of traditional religion. He sensed that the old gods, they were losing their power and something new was emerging, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what that was going to be. The fiery worm, it's really open to interpretation. Some people see it as a symbol of destruction, this kind of cleansing fire. Others interpret it as this messy, unpredictable birth of a new kind of consciousness.
So it's like the whole world is going through this massive molting process,
Yeah.
you know, shedding old beliefs and trying to figure out its new shape.
Exactly. He even uses the term uncharted territory to describe how it felt to be alive at that time. Like people were really yearning for new maps, new ways to make sense of the world.
It's wild to think that he was writing about this stuff over a century ago, and it still feels so relevant today. We're still trying to answer those same questions about meaning, about purpose, especially with everything changing so fast in the world.
It speaks to how relevant his work still is today. He really did tap into something timeless about the human experience. Our need to grapple with those big questions, to confront the unknown, to find our place in it all.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. Confronting our shadow selves, the death of God, fiery worms. But now I need you to tell me more about this whole pleroma thing. It sounds like a big deal, but I'm a little fuzzy on the details.
The pleroma. It's Jung's term for ultimate reality. This realm that's so vast, so beyond our everyday experience that it kind of explodes the way we usually think.
Yeah.
Imagine this ocean of pure potential where all the opposites, light and dark, good and evil, they're not just balanced, they're totally unified.
So we're talking like way bigger than just God, as we usually think of it.
Absolutely. He felt like the pleroma was really beyond our limited human understanding. But he believed we could still get these glimpses of it, like through symbols, through dreams, through those moments where we feel connected to something so much bigger than ourselves.
Didn't he connect the pleroma to this mysterious figure, Abraxas? I vaguely remember that name from a history class, but it's all kind of a blur.
Abraxas is one of those figures that pops up in a lot of different mystical traditions. Jung was really drawn to the way Abraxas embodies both the creative and the destructive forces of the universe. It's like a cosmic yin and yang symbol. For Jung, Abraxas represented the paradoxical nature of the pleroma, this ultimate reality that's everything and nothing, all at the same time.
Okay, I'll be honest, my brain is starting to hurt a little bit.
Oh, man.
And in a good way. So how did Jung actually experience the pleroma? Was it all theoretical for him, or did he have, like, actual encounters with this mind-bending reality?
He wasn't just theorizing. Remember all those vivid experiences that he wrote about in the Red Book? Well, he describes actually meeting these beings from the pleroma, beings that totally defy our normal understanding of reality. He even mentions encountering this dead woman who begs him for blood.
Whoa, okay, hold on. That took a turn. Was she a vampire? Asking for a friend?
Not quite. Jung saw her plea for blood as symbolic, a need for life force, for that vital energy. These encounters, they weren't meant to be taken literally, more like representations of these deep primal forces that are at play both within us and within the universe itself.
So it's less about vampires and more about tapping into this hidden source of energy, this potential that's inside all of us.
You got it. These encounters, as strange as they might sound on the surface, they were Jung's way of showing how we can connect with these deeper forces of the psyche, the very energies that drive our lives.
I'm starting to get why some people call the Red Book a psychedelic journey. Even though, as far as we know, Jung never actually dropped acid, it's incredible that he was able to explore all of this just using his own mind as a laboratory.
And that's the beauty of active imagination. Anyone can use it. It's a tool we all have to unlock those hidden dimensions within ourselves. And speaking of which, there's this other figure in the Red Book that we should talk about, Ayaman.
Okay, now you're just messing with me. Who or what is Ayaman?
Get ready for this, because Ayaman is another one of these figures that Jung encounters in the Red Book. He describes him as this kind of go-between, a mediator between the human world and the realm of the gods.
Okay, that sounds like something straight out of a mythology textbook.
It gets even better. Ayaman starts giving Jung all these teachings, about the true nature of the divine, the relationship between good and evil, the importance of creating your own path in life. Jung actually wrote down these teachings as Sermons to the Dead.
That's Hermes to the Dead. Now I really need to hear more.
Oh, these sermons are incredible. They're like these potent little wisdom teachings. They explore things like creation and destruction, the interplay of opposites, that age-old search for meaning. And the imagery is so vivid, really challenging ideas.
So I Am Men is like Jung's own personal Yoda, dispensing wisdom and guiding him on his journey.
It's a good analogy. Jung saw I Am Men as this part of himself that was searching for a bigger picture, a way to understand these cosmic forces that shape our lives. Like I Am Men embodied this ancient knowledge, this gnosis, that he was so hungry for.
And did Jung just, accept everything that I Am Men said? Or did he ever, push back?
Oh, Jung was never one to follow blindly, not even a wise, otherworldly being. He argued with the gods, these daemons that he encountered, questioned them, challenged them. He felt that a healthy amount of skepticism was actually really important, especially when dealing with the divine.
So even when you're supposedly getting wisdom straight from the source,
Hmm.
you still have to think for yourself.
Exactly. Blind faith wasn't enough for Jung. He was after a real, genuine relationship with the divine, one that honored our limitations as humans, but also our potential for spiritual growth.
He's not afraid to talk about the cost of that journey either, like that dead woman begging for blood we talked about earlier. It feels like Jung is suggesting that there are real sacrifices involved in connecting with our deeper selves, in becoming whole. What did he mean by that?
Yeah, he definitely doesn't sugarcoat it. So what kind of sacrifices are we talking about here? Like, I'm all for a little inner work, but I'm not sure I'm ready to start any blood rituals or anything.
No, nothing like that. Don't worry, I haven't heard of any Jungian blood sacrifices happening recently. What he's really talking about is sacrificing old patterns, those limiting beliefs, those comfortable little illusions that keep us from really growing. So less about literal blood and more about, the metaphorical blood, sweat, and tears of personal growth. Okay, I can get on board with that. But Jung doesn't just focus on all the heavy stuff, right? I mean, he also talks about those masculine and feminine aspects of the psyche. And he even has these encounters with figures like Salome and the Virgin Mary. What's going on there? What was he trying to say by bringing those figures in?
Well, he was really digging into these archetypes of the feminine and how they're not just, female qualities. They're energies that exist within all of us, regardless of gender. Salome, for example, she was this really potent symbol for the shadow side of the feminine, alluring, dangerous, a little bit terrifying even.
Yeah, like that classic femme fatale character you see in old movies, all smoky eyes and whisper promises.
Exactly. She represents those primal instinctual forces that can be both, seductive and destructive. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have the Virgin Mary, who represents the more spiritual, nurturing side of the feminine. Purity, compassion, unconditional love, all of that.
So it's like these two figures represent opposite ends of this spectrum. And Jung is saying we need to find a way to embrace both of those energies within ourselves.
That's the dance, right? He really believed that to be whole, to be psychologically complete, we need to integrate both the Salome and the Virgin Mary archetypes, the light and the shadow sides of the feminine.
And I think what really gets me is that he's not just writing about this stuff from this detached clinical perspective, right?
Yeah.
The way he describes his encounters with Salome, it's like he's really wrestling with these forces on a personal level.
Oh, absolutely. He's not just observing these archetypes through a microscope. He's right there in the trenches with them. He even talks about feeling dishonored, laughable, when he confronts this figure that emerges from his unconscious, the son of the frog.
Okay, hold on. You have to tell me more about this son of the frog thing, because that sounds terrifying, but also kind of hilarious.
Oh, it's classic Jung. He sees this grotesque figure as representing the shadow side of the whole individuation process, those parts of ourselves that we find repulsive, unacceptable, the stuff we really don't want to look at. It's that resistance, the fear, the ugliness that can come up when we're trying to become whole.
Well, yeah, I guess that's the thing about shadows, right? Sometimes they aren't pretty.
Yeah.
But they're still part of us.
Exactly. And what I find really incredible is that Jung doesn't shy away from this monstrous figure. He actually finds a way to integrate it, to see it with compassion, even to kind of rescue it in a way.
So he's saying that even those parts of ourselves that we find most disturbing, they can be redeemed, even loved, if we're brave enough to really face them.
That's the core of Jungian psychology, right? It's not about pretending the darkness doesn't exist. It's about shining a light on it, trying to understand it, and eventually, integrating it into this larger sense of wholeness.
Wow, okay. I think I need a minute to process all of this. It's been quite a journey, from the collective unconscious and the pleroma to fiery worms and sons of frogs. Jung's Red Book is definitely a wild ride. But before we wrap things up, is there anything else from the Red Book that you think our listeners should know about? Anything we haven't touched on yet?
One thing that really stands out to me is how important dreams were to Jung. He didn't see them as just random nonsense. They were these potent messages from the unconscious, full of wisdom and guidance.
Yeah, he even talks about having big dreams, right? Dreams that felt connected to something much larger than himself, like those glimpses into the collective unconscious we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
There was that one where he was in Liverpool, and he had never even been there in real life.
Right. He called it a big dream because it showed him what he called the underbelly of the European unconscious. He saw it as a premonition of the war that was to come, this reflection of all those dark, chaotic forces that were brewing beneath the surface of society.
That's incredible. He was so tuned in to those deeper currents of history, those collective anxieties and fears that we all share on some level.
He truly believed that we all have access to that level of knowing, that connection to something larger than ourselves. And he saw the Red Book as this guidebook for how to explore that inner landscape, how to find our place in the bigger story of humanity.
So it's less about like escaping into our own little private worlds and more about understanding how those inner experiences connect to the world around us, how they might even help us make sense of everything that's happening out there.
Exactly. It's about bridging that gap, between the personal and the collective, the inner and the outer.
This has been an amazing deep dive. We've covered so much. The collective unconscious, the pleroma, this idea of opposites, how important it is to confront our own shadow selves, the whole concept of individuation. And we even touch on the meaning of dreams. But now it's time for us to wrap things up. What's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with? If they only remember one thing from this whole deep dive, what should it be?
I think if there's one central message to the Red Book, it's that the journey inward is just as important as the journey outward, maybe even more so. Jung is really urging us to explore those hidden depths within ourselves, to face our fears, to really step into our wholeness. And that can be challenging, even scary sometimes. But it's also incredibly liberating and transformative.
Yeah, it's like he's handing us this map and saying, okay, now go get lost in the wilderness of your own soul. You might be surprised by what you find there.
And remember, you're not alone on that journey. We're all connected, right? By this vast, mysterious realm of the collective unconscious that we've been talking about, this incredible wellspring of shared wisdom and experience.
And that's a really powerful message for us today, I think. In a world that's constantly trying to distract us, divide us, keep us looking outside of ourselves for fulfillment. Jung reminds us that the real adventure, the real journey of a lifetime, is the one that takes us inward.
He shows us that by embracing our shadows, by integrating all those hidden parts of ourselves, we can tap into this wellspring of creativity, of wisdom, of power that has the potential to transform not just our own lives, but the world around us.
So, to our listeners, if you're feeling called to embark on your own Red Book journey, to explore those hidden depths within, to uncover the treasures that are waiting there, remember Jung's words. The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are. Embrace your uniqueness, your wholeness, your shadows, and your light, and let the adventure begin.